Okay, good morning, everyone. Well, it's a real joy and a privilege to be here. My first time at ELF. I've heard of it through Lindsay and other people, but it's just my first time. And I have really benefited a lot from it. But it's also a real joy to come in a very small way, trying to put my little feet after our giant uncle, Michael. You know, back there in Africa, we are not afraid to call people of his age and his status an old man. I know that in some cultures it's a bit offending to say he's old, but for us to say he's old means he's wise. And, you know, I realize it's part of my life when I see someone to remember something about him. And so every time that I think of him, and I have that privilege of being one of the young leaders, walking behind, crawling behind him and listening from him and getting some wisdom from him. But the first time, Mark, I saw you, I think I checked it with you. This was in Kigali after the genocide. And there was a reconciliation, a big rally on Kigali Stadium. And, you know, Michael is passionate about reconciliation and prayer and all these church things which in some of our minds don't go together. And so that day, they called time for prayer. He just went straight and put his hands on Kagame, the Rwandan president, on his head like this. I can't do that, you know. But I think it's part of his life. So anyway, mine today in a very small way is to share a bit of our experience of reconciliation from the Great Lakes region of Africa. One of very complex, messy region that needs God's grace. So people ask me where I'm from, and I say I'm from Burundi, and some are too smart to tell that they don't know where Burundi is. But to tell the truth, it's a pretty small country. I don't have them. You can see Burundi just next to Rwanda. So the two are very small. So when you look, you try to locate us on the world map, where I just point, you can't see us. So don't blame yourself if you don't know where Burundi is or one and so on. It's not that you are ignorant. It's simply because we are too small to be noticed on the world map. But then the Great Lakes region, it covers these countries. So you have Tanzania, you should have Kenya somewhere, can't see it, south. And then you have Burundi, you have Rwanda, you have Uganda, and Democratic Republic. And if you go further northeast, you will get South Sudan. And so these are the countries which are mainly involved in that program of reconciliation that we've been running. And the Great Lakes Initiative has got some history behind it now of a little bit more than 12 years. And it all started with the Lausanne Movement, actually. So we see as a child of the Lausanne Movement. This was in the preparation of the Pattaya meeting that maybe some of you might know. In 2004, there was a Lausanne big gathering in Pattaya, Thailand. And before that, Lausanne has identified a number of issues that the church would have to deal with in the coming century. And given the brokenness of the world and the many conflicts that were there, we're just coming out of the genocide in Rwanda. This was just after the Balkans War and in many other places. So it was recognized that one of the issues the church will have to struggle with in the coming years would have to do with the reconciliation. So the decision was made to have it as one of the issue group, and then have few people come together and try to write a paper on reconciliation, which then would be presented during the Pattaya gathering in Thailand. At that time, I was working with the IFES, the International Fellowship of Evangelical Student Movement, and I was asked to be on the small team that was writing that paper, just 12 of us. And that's where this started. So 12 of us came together representing different parts of the world, especially coming from the places that were pretty hot in terms of tensions, in terms of violent conflicts. So I was there representing the Great Lakes, where people representing the Korean Peninsula and other places, 12 of us, trying to write a theological paper, just putting something together that might be used by the church worldwide as we figure out how reconciliation would look like in this century. And as we were drafting that paper, we became aware of how theoretical you can be with these things. And so we decided to test it, to test the idea that we had. And we took our draft to Kigali. Remember, we're 2004, just 10 years after the genocide. So we're just reviewing our paper and visiting the Rwandan Genocide Memorial. You look at what you are writing and say, are we serious? Can we leave out this? So it started from there. And then when we went to Pattaya, from the 12, we added another 30-something. So we're about 50 to meet. From, you just name some of the hottest places we had then in Africa, Latin America, Asia, and so on. So we read that paper together with Jews and Palestinians, Hutus and Tutsis, and so on. And then you would look at it and say, is it what the Bible is saying? Can I sign to this? But during that time, the point I want to make is this. As a small group, we bonded together. There was such power of coming together that when it was time to do the presentation to the whole 4,000 people, we say, how can we capture the experience we went through as we reflected on the reconciliation? We couldn't find any way of making a 4 or 5 minute presentation. So we decided, someone came with the idea, what if we were to do the foot washing as a way of demonstrating what reconciliation would look like? And that's the picture you have there, where we had a Hutu washing the feet of a Tutsi and vice versa, where you would have a Palestinian washing the feet of a Jew and vice versa, where you had a Greek Orthodox priest washing the feet of a young Baptist pastor from one of these regions. I can't remember exactly which country. So it was really powerful. And we said, this is what we would like to see. But you see, after Pattaya, we all have to go home. And the question was, what's next? What do we do? Is it over? So when we went back, we said, no, we absolutely have to do something about it. And we have also discovered the power of partnership, of doing things together. So 4 main groups got together, and we decided to launch the movement of reconciliation in the Great Lakes. These were the Mennonite Central Committee, the MCC. It was the World Vision and the Duke Center for Reconciliation in the United States, and another movement called the ALAM, African Leadership and Reconciliation Ministries. And through that process, as we try to find ourselves, define ourselves, we came to understand ourselves as a community of restless leaders. Because we really were restless in our lives. Restless in which sense? In two senses, as we have come with a theology of reconciliation, which looked at the vision of reconciliation, what reconciliation was about, how things should look like if we're reconciled, and then look back and say, this is not what we are. So we felt the tension between what we wanted to see, the vision of reconciliation, and the reality that we're living in our countries. And there were people who felt quite restless, who did not have peace as such. And you know, I like to say, those kind of people, sometimes they make a lot of noise. You know, when you are restless, you tend to create even restlessness around you. So we talked of ourselves as a community of restless people, of people living the tension of how things ought to be and how things really are. And the question was, what do we do? How do we embody this vision, this understanding of reconciliation? So we had to come up with something. So as we wrestle with that, we came to understand three main things. One, that in the work of reconciliation, theology matters. Because sometimes we go into it with techniques, and there are many techniques that has been developed here and there. And as leaders of organizations, of members of organizations, we're very much into the practice of reconciliation, using this technique, using that technique. No, these people come and say, hey, we have done this, so if you do like this. But the truth was, we were all tired, burned out, discouraged, okay? So that's where we started realizing that actually, reconciliation, it's not about us. It's about God himself. It's God reconciling the world, reconciling the creation to him. So it's not us, it's God. So we need to understand it and to follow him in what he's doing. So that was a big lesson, that we needed to get together, that we give you the picture of that restless kind of people coming together to learn from scriptures what reconciliation is about. Reconciliation as God's mission. We are following God in what he's doing. So I just put together some pictures just to give you the idea of who we are and how we do it. So that was number one. Theology matters in reconciliation. So if we go in as Christians, we better be serious with the Bible, with what God says. And the flesh, he became the flesh and dwelt among us. Not only theology matters, the second lesson we learned is that the context matters as well. So theology, it's about God. We have to understand what God is doing, but we also have to understand the context. And the truth is, context varies. The Great Lakes is not South Africa. It's not Northern Ireland. It's not wherever. It's not Europe. But the truth is, we all need to get involved in what God is doing. So context matters. These are just pictures of, as we get together, in groups, trying to understand some of those issues related to the context. The same here, the context. So theology matters, the context matters. Third thing, practices matter. So it's not only about the context, the theology. It's not only about the context, it's also what we do. But what we do, the practices, we do them within the context, but within the contour of the understanding of what God is doing. Now, after that understanding, as we were coming together every year for 3 days to get together with all these restless people, tired people, we're doing less than we do here. Spend much time maybe trying also to get some rest, because reconcilers are the most tired people you can find. Out of that, we developed what we called the Great Lakes Initiative Institute, where we get together for 5 days. It's a 5 days program that we go through year after year. We don't change it. We've been going now, it's 7, 8 years to the same program, repeating the same thing. No one is ever tired about it. I can't understand why, but it seems to be working. So during those 5 days, we put those 3 things together: theology, context, and practice. Day 1, which is Monday, we spent the whole day asking ourselves one question. All the activities that we do, from taking breakfasts, worship time, Bible studies, groups, everything, we have one question for the whole day: reconciliation towards what? What is the vision of reconciliation? What is it? And we take a session in the Bible trying to get a scriptural imagination of how things would look like with the reconciliation, the vision of reconciliation, the new creation, reconciliation towards new creation. And we imagine how it would look like. So we spend the whole day reflecting on that question, trying to recapture the vision of reconciliation. Because as I said, given the struggles, all the things we go through, all the discouragements and everything, when you are discouraged, you easily lose the vision, the objective you were trying to get to. So that today, when we look from scriptures, when we remind ourselves of what God is doing, new creation. So that day 1. Day 2, which is Tuesday, we spend the whole day looking at the context. And when we talk about the context, this time, we go from that wonderful picture of where God is taking us, where everything is reconciled with himself. We are reconciled with God, with one another, with creation, new creation, to say, but what is going on? How is it where we come from? That's a painful day to be in, where we have learned something important in reconciliation, to lament. A discipline, in many churches, we have lost, if we ever had it. So we spend the day lamenting our situation. We allow, or let me say, we force ourselves to look at the reality of things. Remember, theology matters, which means on that day, we have a whole session where we are being taken into the Word. But this day, we reflect around the whole theology, around the theme of lament. And we are lamenting. So people will come in the following session to tell stories of where they come from. It's a painful day. We go through the dodgy things, the bloody things that you know in Burundi, in DRC, in South Sudan. Sometimes you listen to stories, you say, I can't take it. It's the day we allow ourselves to cry. Literally, rooms are filled with tears as we look at how the situation is. That day too, Tuesday. So you see, Monday, we imagined how new creation looked like. Tuesday, we look at our situation. And then on day 3, Wednesday, we move on to another theme. How does hope look like? Because we don't stay just in the lament, but something we have learned is that hope is born out of lament. As we lament in our situations, we start asking ourselves, how does hope look like? And how do we find hope? On Wednesday, we leave our rooms. We go on pilgrimage. That's another discipline that has really helped us. Pilgrimage. Sometimes we go for hours. We drive for hours, going to look for signs of hope. Hope born out of lament. Meaning that, in the midst of that brokenness, in the midst of those difficulties, when you watch carefully, you will see that God is at work. And so you need to point at those things. Go and get it. Sometimes it's just visiting a farm and see someone whose story starts with the brokenness, an orphan, something happened, but with God, this is what has happened. So we learn to go there, touch, feel, say, I've seen it. Yes, there is hope. It's really amazing. You get these stories of hopes. Imagine, just bring up one or two very quickly. This lady in Burundi, a Tutsi, when the war broke, they ran to this church compound with Hutus and Tutsis. And they said, no one will attack here. And then it's her own people, family people, who come to attack Hutus who are there. And they say, get out, because we want to kill them. She said, I can't. And then they decide to kill them. But before killing the Hutus who were there, they decide to shame her, get her stripped naked. And there is this couple, a Hutu man married to a Tutsi woman with a baby. And they tell the Tutsi woman, separate from your husband because you want to kill him. Said, he's my husband. I can't separate. So in front of that other lady, they chop them in pieces. But before they kill the woman take the baby, give to that one. Please, keep the baby. You try to imagine. And about 60 people are killed in that place. And that poor lady is left there, surrounded with dirty bodies, and the baby in her hands. In the days that followed, she's obliged to find a way of burying these tens of bodies in the church compound. But what happened out of there, she took the baby, went out, found other children, and said, love will always prevail over hatred. And from there today, she's the mother of more than 2,000 kids, both Hutus and Tutsis. So you see, out of that lament, to see that happen, you say, yes, it can be done. I can give many stories, but time won't let me. But you understand, day one, reconciliation towards what? What's the vision of reconciliation? Day two, but how are things? And day three, is there any hope? And these are people just contemplating as we go looking for hope. And I forgot to tell you that in this thing, we're both, we're Catholics, we're Protestants of all denominations, characterized by one thing, restlessness. No, if you are a Protestant, Pentecostal, filled with the Holy Spirit, but very well settled in these things, you don't understand us. We're too crazy for you. So you don't belong. But if you are Catholic, we don't have Orthodox there. If you are Catholic, but you are really restless because of this reconciliation thing, and you see me, Pentecostal, you say, yeah, I know you. There's something that brings us together. The story I always tell, I grew up in a conservative, kind of protective church, very far from the Catholics. They are not saved for us. This was the place I met Catholics for the first time. And I ate with them and did things with them. And some of my best friends who had shaped my thinking, I met them here. What do we have in common? Restlessness. We want to see reconciliation. Now, day 4, Thursday, we move to a different kind of question. Now that we have seen hope, we ask ourselves the question, now, how can we get there? What kind of leadership can help us get to that reconciliation we're aspiring so much? That way, to people like Michael and others come and say, hey, what he has been saying. That's how you get there. This is what you have to do. So you see, we begin to talk about practices of leadership. The challenges that we meet there. And remember, we spend the whole day into that. We start the day with worship, then you go to scriptural imagination around the theme of leadership. Then we bring people, we call them witnesses, statesmen like Michael, other bishop, people who are really into this to say, hey, how do you do it? And they tell us stories before we get into groups, specialized groups like what we have here. But still, in every group, people will be asking themselves questions related to leadership towards reconciliation. On day 4, before we come then to day 5, spirituality in the long haul. Meaning, guys, this thing, we have seen it. Now we know how it looks like. We're even learning how, we can lead and be led to get there. But it's a long journey. We get tired on the way. So what are the practices? What are the spiritual practices that can help us on the way? That the day we spend learning, reflecting around the spirituality with a lot of prayer and help from one another before we go home. So that has been very helpful for some of us who live in these tensions, where we know where God is taking us, and where we know that He's inviting the whole church. That the other thing I've learned through reconciliation, this is not a matter of one small church, of one denomination. This is something we are all together in. And therefore we need really a broadened mind, a theology, an understanding, and then these disciplines of being able to look into our situations. Because I remember one day we were in the US in a workshop on reconciliation. And they had invited some Africans who were there. So one day, Tuesday, we went into this lament thing. And then, yeah, I think it was a day of lament. And then as we went into it, they invited some Africans to say, come on, guys, give us some songs. We know that we like to sing and to dance. And then they came with a song in Swahili. They say, Mambo sawa sawa, Mambo sawa sawa. Just meaning, you know, things are great. With Jesus, things are great. And I was laughing, saying, this is us. We run so quickly from lamenting. We are afraid of it. We don't like to look into the situations. But I think it's the way. So the vision of reconciliation, looking into the context, see things as they are, as messy as they are, but through that mess, through the mess, see hope. Hope is born out of lament. It's small. It's, you know, you can't touch it, but it's there. And that which helps us now say, now how do we organize ourselves? What kind of leadership that takes us there? But as we are on that way, man, a lot of discouragement. People want to fix us. They want to take us. No, it's a threatening thing to be involved in reconciliation. And the last thing I think Marco mentioned it, but I want to say it again. The things I've told you, I mean, they're amazing stories with people who are involved in government, people who are doing amazing things. I dare to think people who are keeping that part of the world together today, but always off cameras. No journalists, no one knows, even though we don't hide, but we don't publicize it. And only those we know who are restless get there. It's by invitation only. And yeah, I can't say a lot, but I think we need time to share. So thank you. This is what I want to share.